Hello, everybody, and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me today, I have a Jer.
Hello.
And a Wheeler.
Bountiful.
Just bountiful?
That's a word I saw.
Fair enough. A reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to part 1 of our Commander Legends set review. A reminder for our reviews, these are not exhaustive. We approach these cards from a Canadian Highlander point of view. That's about it. We know there's some powerful other formats out there, but they're not relevant to us in this particular moment in time. Today, we're going to try and cover white, blue, and black, and, time permitting, maybe artifacts as well. Let's jump right into it and talk about Archon of Coronation. 6 mana, 5/5 Archon for 4 white. It has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. As long as you're the Monarch, damage doesn't cause you to lose life. Jer, start us off here.
Do you want to talk about the monarchy in Highlander?
I think that's a really good call. There's a lot of cards we're going to be talking about today that are on the list and have the word Monarch on it. How big of a deal is it in our format, Jer?
Well, it's not that big of a deal unless you care about winning the game of Magic you're in which case it's a very large deal. It's a mechanic that was designed for multiplayer Magic, and I'm sure it's great in multiplayer Magic, but in 1v1 Magic, it completely dominates and makes the game revolve around the monarchy in the vast majority of matchups. There are the select few matchups where it won't really matter, but vast majority of matchups, all of a sudden the monarchy gets introduced, and that's what the big game is about.
So any card that has the word "you become the Monarch" printed on it all of a sudden increases it by a tier?
Often several. Like if Palace Jailer didn't have "you become the Monarch" on it, it wouldn't be like one of the best white cards ever printed for the format. It would be not playable.
A former best card you're not playing without the Monarch is a 4 mana 2/4. That's it.
All right. Well, then let's talk about Archon of Coronation here. So 5/5 flyer enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, and as long as you're the Monarch, damage doesn't cause you to lose life. Where do you rank this?
I actually think this card is medium at best because it costs 6 and it's not green, and it doesn't really fit into the green decks that want the monarchy, especially with this new round of Monarch cards. They have access to better ones.
Sorry, do you mean white decks for Monarchy?
No, because it costs 6, I want to play it in a green deck. Like,
sorry, I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page there. Yeah, all right.
White decks don't really get to cast 6 drops in this format unless they're also green.
That's a very interesting take. I like it. Yeah.
This is me talking. Like, I love playing big, stupid, doofy, clunky cards. And this is just a little too doofy and clunky.
I mean, I could see this in like a Boros Wildfire deck just because it survives Wildfire.
Yeah. All right.
Again, like, note that that's a deck that just plays hot garbage.
Yeah, like you can play literally anything. Like,
yeah.
Does it cost 6? All right, get it in the deck.
Does it have 5 or greater toughness? Yeah.
Sign me up.
Amazing. All right. Well, then let's move on to Arden, Intrepid Archaeologist. This is a 3 mana 2/2 legendary core scout for 2 and a white. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may attach any number of auras and or equipment you control to target permanent or player. And it has partner, which isn't really relevant. I'm going to take this one. I don't know if this card is an all-star, but I will probably experiment with it in Boros equipment. Maybe the ability to move auras is actually very interesting in like the green-white Enchantress aura deck that we're talking about there. There's a cool ability too. You may attach any number of auras and equipment you control to target permanent. You could move around a pacifism or a faith's fetters. Maybe that seems to be more of a corner application, but be kind of spicy. There aren't really a lot of competitive equipment or aura decks out there, so this is going to see niche play at best. Anyone else want to add anything else to that?
We're kind of hitting the density of cards that care enough about auras and that provide a reasonable ability, payoff, that I wouldn't be too shocked if we maybe saw, and then I'm not talking about top of the tables kind of deck, but I don't know, there's enough board-based gameplay going on nowadays, thank you to modern Magic design for that, where pacifisms might actually be not the worst thing to have for, you know, your average board state.
Yeah, if you have enough synergy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you got cards like SRAM and Luris, and there's a series of them from the latest Theros block and some in here. And if you have enough disrupting enchantments and you're drawing cards every time you cast them, you know, maybe you can stall them out enough. You still get Sarah Sanctum in your spread too, so hey, who knows?
All right, let's move on to Court of Grace. Now, this is a cycle that we as Highlander players seem to be pretty excited about. This one, 4 mana, 2 white, gets you an enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying if you're the monarch. Instead, make a 4/4 angel. We're going to open this up to the group, but Wheeler, you haven't had a chance to go first yet. Start us off.
You know, you said we're excited about it. I don't know if excitement is my general...
This card is busted.
Yeah, I actively dislike the Monarch in our format.
Me too.
Really, I think it just, as Jer said, it dictates the game, makes it about it. And one of the best ways to beat it is to just like not let your opponent have additional turns, which is kind of this weird, like, well, thanks tips kind of like way of boiling it down. But I guess, you know, if you want to break that down more, it's like, you know, play combo that doesn't really interact with them. And this kind of card is a way, like a direction that I was really hoping we wouldn't see Monarch get pushed into.
Best 4 mana white planeswalker.
It's so messed up. Yeah, just by like getting the Monarch itself, like it's an enchantment that, you know, great, I'm the Monarch. Good thing white, you know, doesn't have a whole bunch of tools that are cheap to prevent creatures from hitting them, or cheap creatures to get in the way,
or this card to generate creatures to get in the way.
Yeah, this is going to be a recurring theme with a lot of these courts, is that often they don't really require, you don't have to be ahead of the game for the Monarch to really just be the like elbow from the top ropes. You can be at parity or even like slightly behind, right? Because like if you untap with the Monarch and this card, how are you coming back unless like Tendrils of Agony is in the conversation or whatever? So yeah, this card is pretty good.
Yeah, it might be actual time to start playing literal disenchants again. Like there's obviously better ones that cycle now, but like these courts are, spoiler alert, all gonna see a bunch of play.
Yeah, and like Fragmentize doesn't even hit the red one, which is kind of awkward, but maybe like I genuinely, when I saw all these, I looked through my boxes, be like, okay, I have a Kami of Ancient Law, gotcha. Felidar Cub.
Yo, Ronom Unicorn is going to be an all-star in 2021
yeah,
Magic,
exactly.
right?
I'm just like looking at all these, I'm like, you know what? Hey, we have Luris, we have like a lot of cheap white recursion. Like maybe
time to dust off the Dromoka's command.
Yeah.
I mean, I never put that away. Let's go. Let's move on to our next card, Keeper of the Accord. 4 mana, 3/4 human soldier for 3 and a white. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than you, you get a 1/1 soldier token. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more lands than you, you may search your library for basic planes, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Jared, what do you think?
This card is just a sweet design. Doesn't say Monarch. I love it. Yeah, it's a cool card. It's pretty reasonable. I actually think it's better in like more defensive decks because it's sort of like a one card board presence builder. So it's like better if you're like doing other stuff with the rest of your resources. But I think it's a pretty reasonable card that could see some play.
Can you suggest a deck you might see it played in?
I actually could see playing it in like kind of like Staxy decks. I could also see playing it in like tap out control decks. I like wouldn't probably play it in like Death and Taxes or creature mid-range decks. Just doesn't really fit those game plans. But if you have a more tap out style deck that plays white and often find yourself behind on the board, this could potentially help you out.
All right. Next up, Livio, Orthsworn Sentinel. This is a 2 mana 2/2 legendary human knight for 1 and a white. Has an activated ability that says 1 and a white. Choose another target creature. Its controller may exile it with an Aegis counter on it. And then a second activated ability that says 2 and a white and tap. Return all exiled cards with Aegis counters on them to the battlefield under their owner's control. Jer, is there a combo somewhere in this card, or is this just kind of a value card?
I'm not aware of a combo.
but I know you love to blink. I know you love to do weird thing with cheap creatures with ETB abilities.
Yeah, I think the cost on these abilities is just a little too expensive. There's just better ways to sort of recycle your ETBs.
Every combo I've seen with this card it's just one of those classic like, oh, it combos with Paradox Engine. It's like, yep, so does every other card in the game.
Well, you're just not playing this and Paradox Engine in the same deck ever. In this format,
I was using Paradox as like an example. Like people were talking like, oh, you play this in an Intruder Alarm deck. And it's like, okay, but like think of everything that can combo with Intruder Alarm already. And that card still sees 0 play. So how is this, breaking through on that? Like, you're just better off playing Eldrazi Displacer.
Well, then a question I have for the two of you. If you're not making this specifically in a combo deck, does it do enough in a low to the ground aggressive deck like White Weenie or even D&T?
No, probably not. It's legendary, which is actually a downside. It's just a bear ignoring its abilities, which doesn't really merit inclusion either. So I think it kind of like looks like a cool card that does a bunch of stuff, but it's probably just a little too clunky for Highlander.
Yeah, I think this is one of the few set reviews where we can say this and not have it sound like we're trying to slam the format. This is just very much a commander card, right? Like it's such a it's just such a large mana sink and like reliant on people not necessarily playing cards like Fatal Push and whatnot.
All right, let's move on to Prava of the Steel Legion. 3 mana, 1/4 legendary cat soldier. As long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+4, that booty. And an activated ability for 3 and a white, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Wheeler, what do you think?
So I kind of had a weird interaction with playing green-white tokens earlier this year where I put the deck together and played it for like 6 hours. And before I put it together, I'm totally prepared to lose every single match because Naya tokens is something that has pedigree in our format, but I just felt like I'm losing out on like Hellrider and Hero of Oxid Ridge and Bloodbraid Elves, and like why would I do this to myself? And then I think I dropped like one game, like actual game,
just like ran everyone over.
Yeah, I think tokens is a super underrated strategy and just like kind of gets washed away. And I think cards like Prava can help out. Like cards like Prava are why that deck can kind of just stick around, because people look at this ability and kind of go like, oh, well, okay. Like that's a weird plus stat line, right? But if it kind of just reads as like creature tokens you control are indestructible and get +1/+0.
Yeah, that booty means you can attack into most boards and barely lose anything, eh?
Yeah. They do still get swept by like pyroclasms and stuff. Like it doesn't protect from those.
Yeah, as long as your turn, I guess that's the important part, right? Like I'm saying that as long as it's your turn, creatures you control get an added power and they're indestructible is kind of what this can play out like. It's not going to be exactly that, but it's a lot of toughness to add. You're a deck that, I mean, it's a legend, but you're a deck that has mana and has the mana to either pump it into like, if I have to recast it, I recast it.
Cradle just explodes on this game, right? In this deck, right?
And if they don't Caracas it, then you just have this mana sink as well of, okay, I guess I'll just poop out another token and, still have mana for Dromoka's command.
I actually love the direction of the make the booty larger on your turn, because it means it encourages you to attack and not just gum up the board, because you don't have these enormous thick blockers, right?
Yeah.
It's like you could attack. You're actually in a better situation to attack than a token deck normally is, because you're probably not just throwing, a 2/2 away into a 3/3, right?
Yeah, it's like first strike while attacking.
Yeah,
like
love
that's
it.
Just
absolutely
a
love it.
clean line. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to Promise of Tomorrow. 3-mana enchantment for 2 and a white. When a creature you control dies, exile it. At the beginning of each end step, if you control no creatures, sacrifice Promise of Tomorrow and return all cards exiled with it to the battlefield under your control. Wheeler, what do you think of this card?
So I really love this style of effect, and I'm constantly disappointed by it.
Yeah,
and
same.
This one was honestly pretty close, just because the way that you could control this through sack outlets and kind of have it play like a 1/6 one-sided second sunrise. Just like you play it, sack your board, and then at your end step, you get everything back. The issue with this card is that it's a 3-mana enchantment, in that it gets hit by Abrupt Decay, it gets hit by a variety of enchantment removal, which, as per our discussion on the Monarch enchantments, we might start seeing more actual factual disenchants. So there is room for you getting blown out. I could maybe see this card again, like I could see this card kind of pushing through that a bit, or just not that like idea not really factoring in people's decision to include or exclude this card. But I don't know, it's a powerful enough effect. There's decks that can definitely utilize it, but you gotta acknowledge that you're probably getting blown out. But you also might just already know that with, the cards that you're sleeving up, like Viscera Seers and Blood Artists. Like, you're already a deck that's going to lose to a Zealous Persecution.
Yep. So a point of clarity for you, Wheeler. Are you suggesting this as a combo piece, or do you think people could roll it in a mid-range deck as like Wrath Protection?
No, I don't think you... I think you put this in your deck knowing you can kind of control when it's going to trigger and sacrifice itself. I wouldn't put this in being like, all right, try to Wrath my board now, only to have them like pick off some creatures and then...
Yeah, there's better cards you can play for that.
Yeah, I think you play it because it's a permanent. Because it's a tutorable permanent type in decks that can, and it's cheap enough in decks that can use this to like play this, sack my board, get everything, and ideally kill you then, or just accrue so much value through that I'll kill you next turn.
Let's talk about our final white card today, Slash the Ranks. It's the newest Wrath of God. 5 mana, lets you destroy all creatures and planeswalkers except for commanders, which aren't in our format. Jer, what do you think?
This is an interesting one because it's sort of like a double-edged sword, so to speak, because the most problematic card type for blue-white control is Planeswalker, although now they're printing more and more artifacts and enchantments that are just essentially planeswalkers. But you also want to keep your planeswalkers. Like, one of the most powerful things you can do is like play a planeswalker with the plan to Wrath next turn.
Yeah, you make them overextend their board to try and kill it, and then you get more value out of your Wrath, is like classic control plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I think because it's 5 mana, it just ends up being like the cost is too high to really play it. Like, I don't know. I might test it in blue-white, but I think like I've been moving away from Wrath. So like, the more and more I play blue-white, the more and more I'm cutting like Day of Judgment and even Wrath of God, and often just running like Terminus and Supreme Verdict and trying to go lower down, because people will often play around Wraths even if you don't have them in hand. They'll like just be afraid because they know blue-white is the Wrath deck.
I just love that you're galaxy braining creature decks and being like, I'm the Wrath deck. I don't even have to play a Wrath for you to play around it, not overextend your board.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
People have just got that play pattern so ingrained to them that you're often better off just having more single target removal, because it beats the way people are actually playing against you, as opposed to the way people most people are on level 2 now instead of level 1. They're like not just going to play out their entire hand into your Wrath, as sad as that is. So now you're better off like having like Oust and stuff like that in your deck instead of Oust and Condemn instead of Day of Judgment and Wrath.
I'm so sad we don't have cameras right now, because my face right now, my jaw is just wide open, and I'm picturing Galaxy Brain level 3 now, where you actually overextend against the control deck again because you know they don't have Wrath, and then the cycle of violence repeats, and then you add Wraths and they get blown out and back and forth. Wow, you just blew my mind, Jer. Blew my mind. All right, let's move on to blue cards here. We're going to start with Amphin Mutineer, 4 mana 3/3 Salamander Pirate for 3 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-salamander creature. That creature's controller creates a 4/3 blue Salamander Warrior creature token. And it has Encore. Encore is a new ability added in Commander Legends that reads, you pay a cost and you exile the card from your graveyard, and then you create a number of tokens equal to the number of opponents you have, in this case 1. They gain haste, they must attack, and you have to sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. Jared, what do you think of the Salamander?
This card is super dope. Blue exile creature removal is rare, to say the least. the fact that they get a token isn't the worst, or isn't the best, but also not the worst. And the fact that you can use this to upgrade any of your other non-salamander creatures, which is hopefully most of them. I guess you could play salamander tribal, in which case this might not be the best. But yeah, I'm stoked on this card. I think it's very, very good.
Easy to splash for too with the single blue.
Yep.
Really quickly, because we did this for Monarch, Wheeler and Jarrett, what do you think of Encore in the format? Let's throw to Wheeler for starters.
I think the ability is very powerful. Like, it's just Unearth, except, well, no, it's basically just Unearth. But the cost is just really too high, which makes sense given that, you know, it's designed for multiplayer. But I think that most of the Encore costs, you'll probably get to bring them back, right? You'll probably find, if you play Amph and Mutineer, you will definitely find yourself in instances where you will encore it, because it's not, they can't counter it, right? It's the same strength of Embalm and Eternalize cards, like Adorned Pouncer or Earthshaker Kenra, Champion of Wits, you know, that style of effect. So it's not as if it won't happen, but there are a bunch of cards where I'm like, okay, I love the idea of this being able to, you know, effectively come back from the graveyard, but I don't want to pay 5 mana to do it in my deck.
Yeah, I see it as just sort of like gravy. Like you don't really take it into account when you're deciding whether or not to put the card into your deck, but there will be times, as Ben mentioned, where it will come up and you'll gain an advantage from it having this
value.
sort of like bonus ability. But like, I don't think you should put very much weight at all onto it when you're deck building.
It's no dredge, it's no build around graveyard strategy, eh?
Certainly not.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next court, the blue one, the Court of Cunning. 3 mana enchantment for 1 blue. When it enters the battlefield, become a monarch. You'll notice that theme. And at the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players mill 2 cards. If you're the monarch, each of those players mills 10 instead. Open this up to the whole room, but we'll throw the Wheeler because you haven't spoken much lately. Go ahead.
God, you can Savine's Reclamation this. That's kind of a big thing.
You can also go on the play, like counter their turn to play this onto an empty board.
Yeah, I'm definitely playing this in a deck with like Mox Opal and Ensnaring Bridge, or, you know, just any kind of mana acceleration. Like,
it's actually a legit win con once you've locked out the game too.
Yeah, the fact that you can mill yourself and then when you're done, when you're like, I've had enough, I'm going to start milling you.
Yeah, like this does say you mill 10, like you mill yourself, and then once you've already won the game, you mill them.
Usually if you're playing a deck that wants to mill yourself, like, you're like, oh hell yeah, I just milled 4 cards. This 10 cards, like, 1 time is probably enough. 2 is like the max. Like, if you mill yourself for 10 twice and you're a deck that wants to do that, then the game's just over. And like, yeah, this is cheap. It's a cheap blue Monarch card. There are pre-existing archetypes that like can play this and will want to play this. And I'm going to try it out in some slower dredge variants. Again, as I said, I'm going to play it in the like triple Mox Academy, like Planeswalker-y stacks deck. The blue-white like Solemnity, Decree of Silence, like replenish deck that popped up a lot.
Obviously goes into like the self-mill decks, like Bug self-mill and 4-color.
Yeah, it's God, these are gross. Like Birds of Paradise into this, and I'm just
like, that's probably game over.
Yeah, I love our format where we see a card like Court of Cunning, and some people might ask, hey, is mill viable? And you're like, oh, no. We're milling ourselves here. The graveyard is a resource.
Oh, God, yeah. You can mill other people?
Yeah. I hear legend of other formats where you turn the mill at your opponents, and not just at once to win the game.
Wow.
All right.
I legit just got a chill down my spine. I'm like, oh.
Hey, look, I tried. I brought Modern Mill to PTQs and I got rolled over, but I tried. Okay, I have put in my rounds with Hedron Crab.
I've been trapped 3 times by you on turn 1.
Yeah, like we've all cast a glimpse unthinkable before. We've all done things we regret, and sometimes at that given moment, it may have been the right thing to do. Don't get me wrong. Mill is, there was a time where Mill, this bit, and Mill's good in standard right now too. But
yeah, all right, let's move on. Now, I have a very important question, and this is going to test how good we think the Monarch is. Fall from Favor, 3 mana aura. 2 and a white, enchant creature. When Fall from Favor enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature and you become the monarch. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step unless that player is the monarch. Jer, is the monarch strong enough that you'd consider playing this card?
Absolutely, I would.
Oh, yeah.
This card is
Seriously?
easily better than Archon of Coronation. It's a removal spell that makes you the monarch that costs 3.
This card
they
is
play
messed
their
up.
2-drop. You tap out on 3, negate their 2-drop creature that was probably going to kill you and you need to kill eventually anyways. And now you're also drawing an extra card every turn for the rest of the game and they lose.
It's cheap, it's flexible in its converted mana cost, it's tutorable by multiple decks. Like if you're like, you could be like that, the blue-white like Solemnity replenishy kind of deck, or like, I don't know, I wouldn't be shocked if I saw some people in their blue-white builds play this. Like they could Enlighten Tutor for back to basics and they're like, I'll just get this Fall from Favor instead, lock out their Noble Hierarch or whatever. And
so is this, like, no joke, the best card you're not playing from this set? Like the sleeper card from this set?
I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's certainly a card people will look at and be like, oh, this is like claustrophobia, but with the Monarch, whatever, not playable. And people just like still don't understand just how good Monarchy is. Like,
it's
yeah.
God. It's brutal.
Like I've played Narcolepsy before. Like
geez, think about it. Think about like how we were describing the like turn 1 accelerant into like the turn 2 Monarch card and the strength of that, or like the strength of, or you know, all the complaints you've heard about like people casting Oko or Teferi or Narset on turn 2 or whatever. Like acceleration is very
Sorry,
good.
are you comparing Fall from Favor to Oko?
yes.
No, well, I mean, no, okay, Jerry.
I was gonna compare Court to Oko, but I didn't know if you were ready. But...
I'm not willing to go that far, but I do think that it plays a role of like, you have to acknowledge how powerful acceleration is, and that if you have the priority, like if you have the agency of being able to use this before your opponent can take advantage of their acceleration, you know, if it's a mana dork or whatever, like if you're like dork go and they go dork go and you're like, okay, well, I know they're on like an Oko or Teferi Narset deck, or even something like Ramanap, or you know, getting their Uro going or whatever it may be. You're just like, okay, well, I'm gonna brick their mana creature and then start drawing 2 cards a turn right away, which means that then they have to start building to a board, right? They have to do something to get the Monarch, which either means build to the board, which then with your additional cards you can be reactive,
which they're not as well equipped to do as you,
and then or they have to play their own Monarch card to make them the Monarch.
I think I just realized the best Monarch deck in the format. Big Dumb Idiot Bant. the classic of like Voice of Resurgence into literally any Monarch card in the world into Wrath. Can't lose.
I mean, legitimately, there was that, remember that really bad Esper, like Crystal Shard / Allurin deck I played? Yeah, that deck, I was winning matches and against good players, and I'm convinced that like some of these matches were just won by the fact that I had a Monarch card plus Volrath Stronghold. And I just like kept there,
I'm just like, gonna be the Monarch every turn.
Yeah, you're like, I'll take this back. I'll become the Monarch again. Thanks. I'm good.
And just before I get too roasted in the comments, let me clarify that Fall from Favor is not as powerful as Oko or Teferi or Narset. In certain games and certain matchups can feel just as overwhelming and unbeatable.
I think you've made a very good point, and hopefully people can understand that and be like, no, this 3-mana aura is not literally comparable to a Planeswalker, but I see the comparison.
The best card you're not playing from this set might just end up being like Heliod's Pilgrim, when you just now have this card that can tutor up the Monarch or other things.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, let's move on. Next up, we have Hull Breacher, 3-mana 3/2 Merfolk Pirate. It has flash, costs 2 and a blue, and if an opponent would draw card except for the first card they draw on each of their draw steps, instead you create a treasure token. Jer, what do you think?
This card is really, really good. Notion Thief is one of my favorite Magic cards of all time since the day it was printed, and this card is much better. It doesn't feel as good, so like I appreciate the people who really love Notion Thief and play it solely because like the blowouts are bigger, and like I can appreciate that. Like I've done it myself.
This card is good beats.
This card is just much better. Like the ceiling is a little lower, but the floor is so much higher
Like, when someone gets you with a Notion Thief, part of me is like, okay, look, you got me. I'm glad you're having a good time doing this. But, like, come on, let's have a talk. Like, you know you're going to run into someone that's like, oh, okay, shock. And you're just like, oh, God, my mana.
Or worse yet, they just, like, cast a lava dart at any point in the game, and you're just looking at this Notion Thief, and you're like, no, it does nothing.
Oh, they wastelanded me, and all I have is Notion Thief in hand. Right? Like, that card is just like, it just, that's kind of just like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here?
Even if you draw this against a red deck, it's like fine. It's fine.
Yeah, Hull Breacher is good beats.
So I'm just bringing up Notion Thief again here. It's a 3/1. Yeah, Notion Thief just dies to a strong breeze, right?
Yeah.
When it costs 4 and the mana's a little awkward, like it's just really bad.
This is Ancient Tomb mana.
You can occasionally eat a creature. Notion Thief is Ancient Tomb mana. You can occasionally eat a creature with Hull Breacher. It blocks much better. It costs 1 less, which is by far the biggest deal. And if you still cast this in response to a Jace 0 or Brainstorm, they're still conceding. So
So quick question. What is this scene playing? It obviously goes into Merfolk.
Every tempo deck ever.
Yeah. You just think it's that good,
probably most mid-range decks.
Yeah.
Maybe some control decks. Any aggro deck that plays blue.
I gotta say, I'm really glad that I saw this card. Spoiler alert, this was like the card, one of the rares in the first pack at the PPR draft. And I like read it, and it was honestly like kind of made the feel bads of Opposition Agent, we'll get to that, a bit better, because I was like, oh, well, this card's actually cool. Like, it's just like, yeah, I don't care if everybody plays this card. It's neat, right?
Yeah,
it's just good. It's really good.
All right, let's move on to Laboratory Drudge. 4 mana, 3/4 zombie horror for 3 and a blue. At the beginning of each end step, draw a card if you've cast a spell from a graveyard or activate an ability of a card in a graveyard this turn. Didn't know who to throw to in our group. Nobody here has really been trying anything with graveyard shenanigans, but if I had to pick
oh Jesus Christ, Serge, I've like drilled a hole through my Bazaar of Baghdad because I've been tapping it so much. It's kind of all I want to do ever. Maybe it's a coping mechanism for, the Monarch and Oko, but it's okay. I added Oko to my Dredge decks. I think this card's actually just too slow for Dredge. Like, even for like a Sultai one, it is a zombie, which is nice. Like, that's shockingly relevant creature type to have. But it's the Dredge cards are very weird because there's a lot of very specifics about like casting a spell from a graveyard or activating the ability, because it's like, oh, it's not an activate ability, this is a triggered ability, or like technically it wasn't in the graveyard, it exiled itself, and then you could cast it from exile. So there's just, it's not enough of like a blanket, hey, thing from graveyard play, here you go, and it's a little too expensive. Like, I'll give it a shot, I'll definitely try it out, but it's just like 1 card a turn for doing this. Like, I should just play the Court instead. Play Court of Cunning over this card.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on and talk about Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. I can't get over that it's just called Malcolm. 3 mana, 2/2 flyer, legendary Siren Pirate. Whenever one or more pirates you control deals combat damage to an opponent, create a treasure token for each opponent dealt damage this way. Wheeler, what do you think?
Well, it has Ancient Tomb mana, it's got flying, and it generates artifacts, and those artifacts happen to be lotus petals, which add colored, treasure tokens, but, effectively lotus petals, which add colored mana, which might become an issue for, I don't know, a bunch of blue cards you have in your hand when you're playing Ancient Tombs. So I think you'd probably play this in medium blue, aka blue steel, aka salty depths.
Sea Stompy, yep.
The Popeye Stompy. I can foresee myself casting this, attacking with it, and having a good time. There's a pre-existing deck that you can throw it in. That deck isn't exactly the most notable of the medium variants.
Would you call it the least notable?
I think medium white is like the worst one.
I've never been happier to hear anything in my life.
White is too pip happy. It's way too pip heavy. You can't. Where your Ancient Tomb?
I just either wanted to go big white or go smaller. Like, I just felt like, why am I playing my Blinding Angel with this Isumaru? And so I just wanted all Blinding Angel or all dog.
I mean, we all want to go all dog. Let's be real.
Yeah.
So Malcolm has a home.
It's a niche home, but it does everything that deck is looking to do.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. It does a lot of really neat stuff, but it's kind of clunky. It's not like a slam dunk anywhere.
Yeah, like there just happens to be a deck that cares about evasive creatures with ancient tomb mana, that also cares about artifacts, and needs more cards to make up for the fact that all your ancient tomb mana doesn't line up super well with your double blue pipped like Jace the Mind Sculptors and those kind of cards. So there just happens to be like the perfect home for this card in our format, which is hey, that's great.
All right, let's talk about one of the spicier reprints in the set, and that is Mana Drain. Blue instant. Counter target spell at the beginning of your next main phase at an amount of colorless mana equal to the spell CMC. Jer, what do you think?
I mean, this card is really good. It is in fact pointed. It doesn't seem as much play now that it is a point, or since it's been a point. I guess it's been a point for a while now. But if you have a spare point lying around and happen to have access to one of these in a blue deck, I would highly recommend it. Does still get into some blue decks if they have a spare point lying around, and leads to some of the stronger starts those decks can muster. Very good card.
All right. Let's move on to Sakashima of the Thousand Faces. 4 mana, 3/1 legendary human rogue for 3 and a blue. You may have Sakashima of the Thousand Faces enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, so you can't clone your opponent's creatures, except it has the other abilities, which is the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. Does this card have a home in Canadian Highlander, Jer?
I would play it in Clone Tribal.
Is that a real deck, or did you just make that up?
No, it's a real deck. I've in fact bodied Ben with it. Yeah.
When?
It was round 1 of a tournament like a year or two ago.
But like, how big of a deal is the fact that it has to clone your own board? You can't have the best creature your opponent controls.
That deck is built in 2 major categories: things that you want to clone and clones. So in that deck, it's like not an issue, because you built your deck in such a way that if your opponent doesn't have anything good to clone, it doesn't matter.
All right.
You could also clone one of your clones that's cloning one of their things.
Yeah, it's a downside, but it does also have a huge upside that if it's a good clone to leave in hand, because if you get Wrath, you can just play it as a 3/1, as opposed to most other clones are a 0/0.
Right.
So that is a massive upside.
Very true. That's very rare on clones. Cool. All right, well, let's talk more about Sakashima, but this time let's talk about their protege. 6 mana, 3/1, shapeshifter with flash for 4 blue. Has Cascade, which is an activated ability that when you cast it, exile cards on the top of your library until you reveal...
It's a triggered ability.
What did I say?
Activated ability.
Oh, I was on such a roll with reading that reminder text too, but you're right. It's a triggered ability when you cast it that you get a free spell. You know how Cascade works. And you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any permanent that entered the battlefield this turn. Wheeler.
So initially I was kind of just looking at this card and being like, oh, haha, you can play this in like a Super Friends deck. But that doesn't work out the way you want it to, because obviously it doesn't have it does not have Sakashima's rule. But what it does do is it's actually just kind of good in like an eggs deck. I know that sounds kind of weird, but the fact that it can not only copy legendary cards, and that's a good thing, because then it puts Tolarian Academies into your graveyard, which can help generate more loops. It can also just copy, a variety of permanents, right? Doubling up on mana rocks, on various engine cards. It can copy any permanent, right, that you have that's coming to play. And especially if you are looping a Second Sunrise or other cards that, just even casting cards that would bring things from the graveyard to play, you kind of have your pick of the litter of just copying any permanent you own. There is probably a better, or at least a more unique... This is going to be a bit more unique in that application compared to a different card that can fill that role that we might talk about later today. But yeah, this card loops, and that's all you need.
All right. And let's talk about our final blue card today, Sphinx of the Second Sun. 8 mana, 6/6 Sphinx for 6 blue, has flying. And at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you get an additional beginning phase, which means you get to untap, upkeep, and draw. Jerry, you like expensive cards. What do you think of this 8-drop?
I like 5 drops. It's debatable whether you can classify 5 drops as expensive or not. 8 is certainly expensive, and I don't foresee casting this very often. I think if you are putting it into play, you're cheating it in somehow. I don't know if it's good enough to reanimate. I don't think so. But
the deep inhale from Wheeler. Yeah, all right, let's hear it.
I legit think this is one of the most busted cards in this set.
Really?
For reanimating and for playing in Academy decks. Yeah.
Because of the double untap?
So for the Academy decks, it's like...
I could see it in Academy.
Yeah, but for Reanimator, my thing with Reanimator is that it also just provides like a thing that if you reanimate early enough, you can negate the fact that you are tapping. Like you can use your more proactive disruption after casting the reanimate, right? So like instead of it lets you switch up some of your hand attack that might delay your sequencing or stagger your ability to produce a threat, where you can like reliably cast this or bring this back, untap, draw an additional card, and then you have mana to either use for hand attack afterwards to pull apart any potential answer that they could have, or then just keep up mana for counterspells, which your deck also can run. Like
drawing an extra card every turn's also pretty ridiculous.
I could see it.
Yeah,
that's immediately where my mind went, but I hadn't thought about it too deeply.
Yeah, it's I think
all right, I'm swaying. Yeah, put it in your reanimator deck.
Yeah,
and your Academy deck.
Yeah,
you got me.
Yes,
I also like playing creatures in Academy. Like you have to be pretty like strict on what creatures, but like once Academy decks put in like Sai and Urza, I found I was winning so many more games with Academy.
Yeah, most of my Academy decks have changed in such a way that you can also just win off the back of these creatures that can be, you know, both defensive as well as
Shimmer Dragon.
Like it started with Walking Ballista was the like, okay, thank you for making this easy for me forever.
Well, yeah.
Even, I mean, but beyond that, right? Like even just having like Luris be like a relevant body and, you know, holding like, have you ever put a Sword of the Meek on a Luris? Like that's just a 4/4 lifelinker. Like red can't beat that.
Batterskull.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, let's move on to black cards here. And our first one is Armix, Filigree Thrasher. 3 mana, 3/2 legendary golem for 2 and a black. When it attacks, you may discard a card. When you do, target creature defending player controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control plus the number of artifact cards in your graveyard. Wheeler, what do you think?
This card definitely has some like upfront weaknesses. It's only got 2 toughness. You can't cast it immediately off workshop, and it's a legendary artifact creature without an ETB, which is like that screams just like Armix comes out and says, hey everybody, if you think you have a way to kill me, you probably do. Come on down.
Right. But very vulnerable, and like this is a card that's been given more weaknesses, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, in the deck where I would play it, I'm not exactly looking at my like, oh gosh, I don't know, my German foil Hovermere and thinking,
You're thinking the same thing I'm thinking.
Yeah, it shouldn't be played at all. Is that what you're thinking?
What?
What I'm trying to say is that like you're playing a deck with creatures where like, well, you were born to die. Like you're just a thing. Like, what is my purpose? Carry cranial plating. Anything else? Nope. Oh God, that's all I have to live for.
You're describing most of the decks I like to make, right?
Yeah, exactly. So once you get past that, this card kind of just reads, when it attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, destroy target creature and opponent controls, right? But even like destroy, you can get around the destroy, because like if you're playing an artifact deck that wants to attack with artifact creatures and plays artifacts, you are probably going to get enough artifacts either in your hand or your graveyard, you know, maybe from the fact that people kill artifacts, from the Wheel of Fortunes you've cast, whatever, you know, pick however you want to put them there. you will probably have enough to reliably just give things -5/-5.
Yeah.
Right?
I like this as a way to pitch a late game artifact land or a Moxen. I'm thinking about this specifically in battle bots. Yeah, I like this card.
Yeah, I think black is an underexplored color for the artifact aggressive decks. Because, like,
There aren't a lot for it. There aren't a lot of payoffs other than like your Disciple of the Vault. There's the artifact that regrows itself. It's like the 3/2 for 2.
Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Scrap, yeah, and then Colligan's Command. Then like maybe you're playing Baleful Strix, but a lot of the problem with the black artifacts is they're very pip heavy.
Yeah, but I think that there are a lot of supporting cards that are admittedly aren't artifacts themselves, but they do enough that you can justify not including them. That, like, if they go, that are cheap, and if they go unanswered, you just get to win the game. Like Painsmith, it's like a 2-mana 2/1. That whenever an artifact ETBs under your control, something gets +2/+0 in Death Touch. That's a card that can spread the love and can, like, on any given turn, can give like +4/+0, like very easily to your board.
I'm going to be honest with you. I've never seen Painsmith before, and I'm kicking myself because this card's incredible.
I love this card. I love this card.
I am immediately in love with this card too. Like, have you ever heard of Love in First Sight? Because like, I think I'm getting that right now.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Hey, I've been married for 7 years, haven't I?
Cool. All right. Any final thoughts on Armix?
I mean, I have a bunch of like little kid, like, oh wow, he's so cool. He goes brant, and look at him and he brant. But other than that, no, I'm good.
Let's talk about the Black Court of Ambition. 4 mana. Enchantment, 2 black. When it enters the battlefield to become the monarch. Buckle up, this gets weird. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. But wait, if you're the monarch, instead each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. Let's start with Jer and open this up to everybody. Watch your step.
It's once again absurd. I didn't read the 2 cards part until I just read it again now, and I already thought it was nuts. It's nuts. Yep, that's what I think.
Wheeler?
Every day we stray further from God's light. And
yeah, I like this. What are you going to play this in? I'm going to play this in stacks. I'm going to play this in pox. I think this is an unbelievably
mid-range control aggro.
You're going to put it in everything? I don't think every deck wants a 4-mana enchantment.
It wins you the game.
I mean, it's very powerful. I think it will lose some luster once people adopt to more enchantment, based things kind of mucking about. But yeah, I mean, if I can cast this and reliably keep the Monarch or get the Monarch back, like, this card's just going to kill people very quickly.
The most messed up thing is, like, the best way to beat these new enchantments is to kill them with, like, disenchants, or just be a deck that's, like, the best Monarch deck.
Like, legit, I kind of just want to put Devout Witness into Death and Taxes as well, now that I think about it. Just like repeatable enchantment-based removal.
So for people who aren't familiar, what is Devout Witness?
Oh, people not familiar with Mercadian Masks All-Star Devout Witness. This card's actually not that bad. It's 2 and a white for a 2/2. It's a human, also a spell shaper. Pay 1 and a white, tap, discard a card, destroy target artifact or enchantment.
Oh, turns any card in your hand legit into a disenchant. Nice.
Yeah, it's got ancient 2 mana. It's got a relevant casting cost, relevant creature type.
But, like, you're still so far behind if your plan is just to disenchant these.
Oh God, yes. You kidding
That's
me?
the problem.
I know.
Well, the nice thing about Court of Ambition is you have to wait a whole turn cycle for the upkeep. Like, if you're trading, you're 2 for 1 in yourself if you disenchant it, because they'll still be the Monarch. They play a card, they gain a card, you've used a card.
But that's assuming you equalize the Monarch the next turn.
Right.
And if you don't do that, then they have 3 for 1 to you.
This is why I think that the correct way to deal with this is just to play it. Like,
Yeah,
you
right.
just play your own court, which is a little parasitic and kind of an issue that the Monarch has always had. So
I really wonder if we could just make like the 5-color court deck, probably.
just ban the Monarch keyword from our format, and I think we'll be okay.
Love it.
Well, we'll talk about that another time, I suppose. All right, let's move on to Miara, Thorn of the Glade. 2 mana, 1/2 legendary elf scout for 1 and a black. Whenever it or another elf you control dies, you may pay 1 and a life. If you do, draw a card, Wheeler.
So this set has a bunch of black elves in it, and elves is already, like, I think I spoke about this on a previous episode, where elves is actually just a totally fine tribe that is honestly pretty good. And, you know, long gone are the meme days of playing elf tribal, actual factual elf tribal. And I think the biggest issues with the like public view of elves is that, one, they kind of say, well, why not just play hoof? And two, I don't want to play green white or whatever. And because elves functions completely differently. Like you can build an all-in like combo-y deck, or maybe focus on druids. Don't know who would do that.
Wow.
But like,
wow.
but like, no, that was supposed to be a nod, not a dagger in the back. Maybe my phrasing was a little off. But yeah, it's just like they have their own identity as what they are going to provide. And then for like the color scheme, I think the best setup is going Sultai, where you have, because people have traditionally gone for, you know, they've thrown white in there. You get Stoneforge for your Skull Clamp, you get Eladamri's Call, you know, all those fun things, Armageddon's even. But like, I don't know, you're a deck that can Demonic Tutor for Natural Order. You're a deck that can play Leovold, Oko. Leovold's an elf, which is pretty big. And you also just have Shaman of the Pack and Prime Speaker Vanifar. Like, it's the supplementary colors, especially black, make it real easy for you to just combo kill them. Either infinitely, you know, through an infinite loop, or through, I'm just going to drain you for 5, like twice every turn until you die. And so Miara, there's not much to say about this card in particular, other than it's a cheap elf in those colors that does a thing that your elf deck will want to do.
Cool.
Yeah, that's it. But she's good in that.
Well, let's talk about another elf, Nadiers or Nadiers. Let's call it French. Nadier is Nightblade, 3 mana, 1/3 elf warrior for 2 and a black. Whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, Wheeler.
So elves has been known to kill using tokens, to specifically through these loops, right? It's pretty easy for that to be the way in which the elf deck can go infinite, and then it just needs a payoff. Cards like Dwyn's Elite, which is a 2 mana 2/2 elf warrior that when it ETBs, if you control another elf, you make an elf token, which in elves, you're probably going to have other elves, so you make an elf. Or Wirewood Hive Master that says when an elf comes into play, you get a 1/1 insect. So you have a bunch of tokens. Now you just need a way to kill them with it. And usually, you know, you can do hoof stuff. You can do, well, hoof stuff.
Traditionally just hoof stuff, right?
Yeah, just hoof stuff, you know. But now we have a tutorable like blood artist that can kill with all those tokens. And like, this card might not just be elf specific either. Like, there are a bunch of things that are tokens that people don't register as tokens, like food, clue tokens. I'm sure there are other treasure. Yeah. So yeah,
Neat.
Did you say meat or neat?
I said neat.
Okay, I thought you said meat, like you're saying like, you forgot meat tokens, and it's like,
yeah.
my bad.
Along with food, don't forget the barbecue. No, that's cool. I like the broader application of like, maybe there's an Urza deck or some type of an artifact deck that produces a bunch of treasure and sacks all that for lethal.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I'm sure this might be a thing you could do in Aristocrats proper, but like, we have like 5 2-mana blood artists now. I think we're good.
Who would have thought the day would come, eh?
We'll still take more literal blood artists, but yeah, like these kind of like niche ones we can start passing on. Yeah,
Gavin, if you're listening, we will take as many 2-mana blood artists as you are willing to give us. But the 3-mana ones we're okay.
All right, let's move on to Nightshade Harvester. This is a 4 mana 2/2 elf shaman for 3 and a black. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player loses a life. Then put a +1/+1 counter on Nightshade Harvester. What do you think, Jer?
I think it's just a little too expensive for the ability. It's a 4-drop that doesn't do anything when it enters and revolves around your opponent choosing to take actions that now benefit you. And by your turn 4, there's a chance they A, won't have a land, or B, won't need to play one, in which case you just paid 4 mana for a 2/2. It's pretty easy to remove. I just think it's a little too fragile and unlikely to sort of do what you want it to do often enough to make it worthwhile playing.
I think it's a very fair summary there. Let's Let's move on to Opposition Agent. 3 mana, 3/2 human rogue for 2 and a black, has flash. I think this is a card a lot of people were excited about when spoiler season was happening.
I'm shaking my head.
You control. Yeah.
You keep using that word excited.
I don't know. I mean, it generates
Dreading.
Yeah. All right. You control your opponent's turn while they're searching their library. Chef kiss. Chef kiss. While an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. Not even for as long as you control Opposition Agent, just forever. And you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. Jer. Look, don't you love Aven Mind Sensor? Don't you love getting people? It's like the idiot bird, but
in better colors with better stats.
More relevant creature type.
Yeah.
Human.
I love just like the collective sigh. I've never been like, let's talk about a card and just had silence from the two of you as you're both just sad.
Like,
what?
Just annoyed. This card is so oppressively strong against literally every deck in the format except mono red. And even there, like if you tag one of their, like if you go land dork and they choose to play a creature and then fetch on 2 and you get their land, they probably lose. So you'll even win some games against mono red with this card. Yeah, it's beyond absurd.
Sad isn't the emotion I would describe. It's just
we're disappointed.
Like I sincerely mean this, and not as a comment on the format, but it's just like I look at this card and I think I'm okay playing less Magic. I look at this card, I'm like, I don't want to play Magic as much anymore. You know, like it's just kind of like, and I'm not trying to necessarily be hyperbolic. It's just this kind of card that, as Jared said, its power level and application is just so universal. And I understand, like, oh, Ben, you can just shock it. It's like, okay, well, one of the issues I have with Aven Mind Sensor, and why it's one of my least favorite cards. It still is, but this is on a totally different level, entirely different level. Like I affectionately refer to Aven Mind Sensor as the idiot bird. This card, I'm just always going to refer to it as a very loud sigh. It punishes you for playing the game.
When it doesn't even give you a chance, like at least with...
Sorry. If I could jump in. For people who don't understand why this card is going to punish you, how does it work? So if I fetch a land and Jer gets me, what happens to my triggered ability, my fetch land?
I can no matter what I choose, I can find a land or I can just fail to find a land. If I find a land, you don't get the land. I then get to play that land. So like, not only do you not get it, but I get it. Like this card should have been at least 5 mana, maybe 6.
So here's the next question I have. Like something like Blood Moon, as cards that exist that some people hate, does it create is it a great leveler? Does it punish the right kind of decks?
No.
And does it, like, what does it do for a metagame?
This card is way worse to play against than Blood Moon.
Yeah, again, like this punishes you for playing Magic. For like if you think about the actions, your average series of actions that you would take when playing an Eternal format. I mean, you could even just say a format in general. Searching your library is just the thing that happens. But especially for something like Highlander, like this card drops down, says, oh, sorry, you wanted to rampant growth. No, you don't get to do that. In fact, I get to do that now. And for what? Like, why? It's not a good thing to punish people for playing rampant growth.
For the reason it's not a fair comparison to Blood Moon, because there's no cost to put this in your deck. Like if you're playing Blood Moon and don't want to get severely ranched by your own card, you have to make considerable deck building decisions by including an above average number of basics, basic lands apart from mountains in your deck. If Blue Moon decks didn't play Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon, they would not play nearly as many basic islands as they do. Like any deck wanting to play Opposition Agent, all you have to do is cut the worst card in your deck. Like that's literally it. And it just, if you draw it, your opponent, worst case, it's just a reasonably costed body with flash. So like the floor is already very, very high because like flash creatures are at a massive premium in this format. And like best case, your opponent, like and I think the average case is actually closer to the best case than the worst case, is your opponent just loses the game immediately on the spot. And like the problem is in our singleton format, like you often have to rely on tutors to deal with these problem cards. You're like,
yeah, for consistency. Yeah.
Well, I have to find a tutor to get rid of this card. And like most of the time that's a fine way to a fine play pattern in our format. But this counters the way most decks have to beat these types of cards. So there's like many decks just like have no recourse against this card.
Any final thoughts before we move on? I know we had a lot to talk about with this one. I thought that was an excellent button for what it's worth.
Please stop. Please don't print cards like this. At this cost, just please don't.
All right, let's move on to Tormod the Desecrator. 4 mana, 4/2, legendary zombie wizard for 3 and a black. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. How about this one, Wheeler? Is this one closer to what you want?
Yeah, this one's a little bit closer. This one's pretty good. The restriction on having things leave your graveyard, or not restriction, the requirement of having things leave your graveyard is a lot more open-ended, meaning that basically there's so many things you can do, and you're just going to be able to get zombies off this.
Like Delve.
Yeah, the Dread,
flashback,
anything. You know, I already lifetime probably had the most tapped Phyrexian Furnace activations and Scrabbling Claws in the game. And heck, you might even do that, you know? You might even get your own things to make some 2/2s. The fact that this card is black is also just better than the Drudge, the 3/4, because you're a deck that plays Icarid. You're a deck that is going to be more, you know, you're looking to have more black cards than non-black cards. It's still a zombie, and it hits like a truck. It dies, but shocking literally no one. Dredge in these graveyard-based decks.
You might have a way to recur it in the deck that interacts with its graveyard.
Yeah, I got a couple of ways. Yeah, I got a couple of ways, you know, to bring it back.
Love it. Love it. Alrighty, let's move on to our final black card of the day. This one's another very spicy reprint, Vampiric Tutor. It's an instant, costs a single black, and it says, search your library for any card, then shuffle your library, put it on top, lose 2 life. Jer, tell us about the Tutor.
Very powerful card, often or pretty much exclusively used in combo decks, especially combo decks that are sort of like the one card combo decks. Like when I think of this card, I immediately think of Oath of Druids and Hermit Druid, the decks that like revolve heavily around one card. It's also been played a lot in Reanimator, where you often have like a lot of A and a lot of B, and like it's a way to get whichever one you sort of don't have. Yeah, if you're looking to play a fair tutor, you often choose Demonic Tutor instead, but it is reasonable to play this in a fair fashion as well, just not, in general, not as good or used as often, but very strong card.
Let's move on to the artifacts we want to talk about today, and let's start with the Ingenuity Engine. 7 mana artifact, but it has Cascade, and an activated ability, 1 and tap, and sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact you control to its owner's hand. Wheeler, what do you think?
So this was the big card that we were going to get to that goes infinite, and geez, I've lost count how many ways it does everything. 7 mana is it's not 0, but when you have Workshop, Tolarian Academy, Krark Clan Ironworks, Paradox Engine, you know, 7 mana is whatever. You get that every other day. Having Cascade is one of the ways that this can go infinite, because it can, you know, repeatedly just lets you cast your entire library, albeit everything has to be 6 mana or less, but that's fine. It allows you to sacrifice artifacts. Usually artifact combo decks like putting other artifacts into their graveyard. This one's no different. And when you do, you get to return an artifact you control to its owner's hand, meaning you get to reset, say, a Paradox Engine, get a new ETB trigger, return this card to get another Cascade, which, spoiler alert, might have to deal with this going infinite. It's kind of funny because this card, like anytime they have blank engine with like the Kaladesh kind of style of artwork, it's very obviously like a nod to Paradox Engine, which famously, this isn't a Commander set. Paradox Engine is banned in Commander, thank God. And this is kind of like, oh, here you go. Here's a little thing. It's not as busted. And I'm just looking.
Here's a gift for you.
I thought this was fake when I saw it because it was like, this just
You're
is
like, cool joke,
easy.
Twitter, right?
Yeah, great joke. Streamer laugh. Like, what? So yeah, play this in your artifact decks to win games.
All right, and the final card we are going to talk about today is the Staunch Throne Guard. 5 mana construct, gets you a Vigilant 2/5, and when it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. Is it good enough, Wheeler?
Well, I mean, you can cast off Mishra's Workshop. You can cast off Mana Vault. That's pretty good. I believe this is the very first artifact Monarch creature we've gotten, and it's also just has a relevant 5 toughness, meaning it survives wildfires, survives every kind of removal spell aside from ones that'll kill, artifacts.
Combat, it blocks insanely well. It attacks pretty well.
Yeah, it's got a lot going for it. I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty reasonable. It's not going to be for everything, but yeah, I foresee this card coming down pretty early, getting the Monarch, and then being able to keep it.
All right, everybody. Well, that is going to do it for part 1 of our Commander Legends set review. This has been a bunch of fun. We had some very, very interesting discussion on a couple of cards here today. If there's any cards you think we've missed, any cards that you disagree with our say, let us know down in the comments below. Love to read that, especially before part 2. And we will get to part 2, which is going to be covering red, green, and gold. Reminder that Northern Hunter is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Also, thank you very much to all of our YouTube subscriptions, or YouTube subscribers, pardon me. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.